Would you believe a state adding over 200,000 new residents a year is also quietly losing thousands of families every single month? It sounds impossible, but it's happening right now in towns you've probably seen in vacation photos, towns everyone assumes are booming. Not because of some dramatic hurricane headlines splashed across the news, but because of insurance bills that double overnight, property taxes quietly outpacing paychecks, and whole neighborhoods transforming block by block while nobody's watching closely enough to notice. Longtime residents are packing up and leaving in silence, and by the time the pattern becomes obvious, it's already too late to stop it. This isn't a guess. It comes straight from census migration data and insurance filings most people never bother to open. Stick around because town number 7 might be the one closest to you, and it could change your mind about moving to Florida. Number 1. Fort Myers Beach. Fort Myers Beach used to feel like a postcard frozen in time. Small cottages, salty ocean air, neighbors who had lived there for 30 years and never once thought about leaving. Then Hurricane Ian tore through, and what followed wasn't just wind damage. It was a financial disaster that's still unfolding today. Here's the number that should stop you cold. Of the 700,000 plus insurance claims filed across Florida after Ian, roughly 1 in 3 were rejected or left unpaid for months. Homeowners who trusted their windstorm policy discovered, too late, it barely touched their actual storm surge losses without a separate flood policy alongside it. So picture this. A family stands in front of what used to be their home, insurance check in hand, and it isn't even close to enough to rebuild. What do? They sell. Quietly, painfully, and for far less than they hoped. Local officials confirmed slow, inadequate payouts were forcing longtime residents off the island for good. And here's the twist that makes it sting even more. As the original families packed up, luxury developers moved in right behind them. New builds, higher price tags, and a completely different kind of resident replacing the ones who made the island what it was. The beach is still there, the sunsets are still there, but the community that defined Fort Myers Beach for generations is disappearing in real time. Walk down what used to be a residential block there now, and you'll see the shift with your own eyes. A handful of original cottages holding on, wedged between glass and steel construction sites that dwarf everything around them. The old fishing charters and family-run seafood shacks are gone, replaced by amenities built for a completely different kind of buyer. If you're thinking about buying anywhere near Florida's coastline, take this as your warning shot. A standard windstorm policy is not enough. You need separate, dedicated flood coverage, or you could be one storm away from losing everything you've built, with nothing left to rebuild it. Number 2. Dunedin. Dunedin keeps landing on best small town lists, and that should be a good thing. Instead, it's quietly becoming the reason longtime families can no longer afford to live there. Every time this Pinellas County gem gets more famous, its property assessments climb right along with it, and the people who made Dunedin special are the ones getting squeezed out. Census data confirms it. A slow, steady population decline, even as the town's national reputation keeps rising. Think about how backwards that is. Success is supposed to be a reward. Here, it's becoming a quiet eviction notice. Families with kids enrolled in the local schools have been hit the hardest. They're the ones forced into an impossible decision. Stay in the community they've poured years into, or walk away for financial breathing room somewhere else. Local advocacy groups have pushed hard for stronger homestead protections and more generous assessment relief, but state-level reform moves at a painfully slow, grinding pace, often too slow to save the families already deciding it's time to go. And once they leave, they rarely come back. Another for sale sign goes up. Another moving truck pulls away. The pattern repeats so quietly that most people driving through Dunedin's charming downtown would never guess what's happening behind closed doors just a few blocks over. Talk to longtime residents at the local farmers market, and you'll hear the same story on repeat. A neighbor who sold last spring, a friend's parents who moved north where the tax bill doesn't eat their retirement, a house down the street now a short-term rental instead of a family home. Nobody wanted to leave. They simply ran out of room to stay. If you're eyeing a Florida town because it just made a top places to live list, don't just check today's price tag. Pull the 5-year property tax trend before you sign anything. Rising desirability almost always means rising bills. And Dunedin is proof that popularity has a price its own residents are the ones paying. Number 3. Largo built its entire identity on being the practical choice, the no-frills middle-class alternative to Florida's flashier coastal towns. This was the place where a regular family could buy a home, build equity, and feel like they were getting ahead. That identity is cracking. Town officials have tried to soften the blow, but they're boxed in by a state tax structure that gives them little room to maneuver. The result is a slow, steady bleed rather than a dramatic exodus, which somehow makes it more unsettling. Families who could comfortably afford Largo 5 years ago are now running the numbers and coming up short. One by one, they're looking a county or two over, chasing the affordability Largo used to offer. Here's what makes this town such an important warning sign. Largo wasn't supposed to be vulnerable. It wasn't the luxury coastline. It wasn't the tourist trap with inflated prices built for out-of-state buyers. It was the steady, dependable option. And if even Largo is losing its middle-class base, that tells you something much bigger is happening across the entire region, not just in one zip code. When the safe towns start showing cracks, it usually means the pressure has already spread far beyond the headlines. Middle-income buyers priced out of Largo aren't just moving to the next town over anymore. Some are leaving the state entirely, taking their tax dollars, their labor, and their kids' enrollment numbers with them. Drive through Largo's older neighborhoods on a weekday afternoon, and you'll notice something subtle but telling. Moving trucks loaded with boxes headed straight out of state. A teacher who can no longer afford to live near her own school. A retired couple choosing between the roof and next year's tax bill. These aren't dramatic disasters. They're quiet, everyday decisions adding up into something much bigger. So if you're chasing affordable Florida, widen your search radius and check whether the whole region is trending the same direction. Because right now in Pinellas County, it very much is. Number 4, Miami Beach. Miami Beach's population has actually declined in recent years. Rate that again, because it doesn't match the image most people have in their heads. One of the most desirable, most photographed addresses in the entire country, and fewer people are actually living there full-time than before. Families with children have almost entirely disappeared from the local mix, priced out by a brutal combination of sky-high housing costs and property taxes that make raising kids there financially impossible for almost anyone. So who's replacing them? Increasingly, it's wealthy international buyers and investors who treat these properties as assets to park money in, not homes to raise a family in. That distinction matters more than people realize. An empty investment condo doesn't send kids to local schools, shop at the corner store, or coach the neighborhood little league team. Service workers and professionals who keep Miami Beach running now commute in from far outside the city because living where they work isn't an option anymore. Local officials have openly voiced the fear driving this story. Miami Beach risks becoming a beautiful shell, a playground for the ultra-wealthy that has quietly lost the living, breathing community underneath all that glamour. Imagine a neighborhood that looks perfect in every photo, yet feels strangely empty in person. Dark windows in expensive buildings, no kids playing outside. Local teachers, nurses, and restaurant staff who keep the island functioning now describe hour-long commutes just to clock in for a shift, driving past the very buildings they help maintain but could never afford to live inside. Picture the exhaustion of that daily routine. Waking up before sunrise, sitting in traffic for an hour, just to serve coffee or teach a classroom in a city that no longer has room for you. If you're evaluating any hot real estate market, don't just look at price growth. Ask who's actually buying. When investment dollars outpace owner-occupants, schools, small businesses, and community life tend to hollow out, even while property values climb higher every single year. Number 5, Cape Coral. Here's a number that should make you pause. Cape Coral home values dropped nearly 9% over the past year. Falling prices usually mean a buying opportunity, right? Not this time. This is a warning light, not a discount sign. Climate data scientists point to a brutal chain reaction driving this decline. Stronger storms and worsening flooding push insurance premiums through the roof. Sky-high premiums make it harder for buyers to get mortgages approved. Fewer approved buyers means less demand, and less demand is exactly what's now dragging Cape Coral's home prices downward. Real estate professionals who watched this market boom during the pandemic are now openly using the word overshot, meaning the wave of out-of-state buyers that inflated prices for years has finally run out of steam, and the correction is landing hard. Picture a homeowner who bought in 2022 at the peak, confident Florida real estate only moves in one direction. Now their equity is shrinking, their insurance bill just doubled, and their neighbors are quietly listing their homes at a loss just to get out from under the payments. That's not a rare story here anymore. It's becoming the norm. And it isn't only affecting sellers. Buyers eyeing Cape Coral because prices finally look affordable need to slow down and ask the harder question: why did the price actually drop? In a hurricane-exposed market, a falling price tag can simply mean insurance carriers are pulling out of the zip code entirely, leaving whoever buys next stuck with skyrocketing premiums or no coverage at all. Before you get excited about a deal here, call a local insurance agent first. Ask what happened to premiums over the last 3 years in that exact zip code. The answer will tell you more about the real state of Cape Coral than any listing price ever could. And it might just save you from buying a discount that quietly turns into a financial trap the very moment the next storm season rolls around and the renewal notice hits your mailbox. Number 6. Port St. Lucie. Port St. Lucie spent years marketing itself as the budget-friendly alternative to Miami's chaos and the coast's inflated price tags. Families flocked here specifically because the math worked. Lower prices, a slower pace, and just enough distance from the state's most expensive markets to breathe easy. That reputation is now cracking under real pressure, with home values softening as the same insurance spiral hitting Cape Coral works through Port St. Lucie too. Here's the cruel irony nobody saw coming. Towns that marketed themselves hardest on affordability are often the most exposed when insurance spikes, because their appeal was built on families running tight budgets with almost no room to absorb a surprise expense. A $100 premium jump is the difference between making rent on time and quietly falling behind month after month until falling behind becomes the whole story. Multiply that by thousands of households across the region, and you start to see why the quiet outflow is picking up speed. It's not a single dramatic breaking point. It's death by 1,000 small increases, each one small enough to shrug off on its own, and devastating once they all land in the same mailbox the same month. Nobody's making dramatic headlines out of Port St. Lucie. There's no single viral story. It's happening one household budget spreadsheet at a time, in kitchens across the city, as families realize the affordable Florida promise they moved here for has quietly expired. If you're evaluating any town marketed hard on the word affordable, don't take that word at face value. Ask for the worst-case insurance premium scenario, not just today's number. Talk to a local agent who can tell you what actually happened to premiums in that specific zip code over the past 3 years. Because in Port St. Lucie and towns exactly like it across the state, affordable has quietly become the most misleading word in Florida real estate. A promise that felt true the day people signed their mortgage and quietly stopped being true just a few renewal cycles later. Number 7. St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. Pinellas County alone lost close to 12,000 residents between mid-2024 and mid-2025. Let that sink in for a second. That's the steepest population decline of any county in the entire United States, outside of Los Angeles. Not a small vacation town, not a struggling rural county nobody's heard of. One of Florida's most recognizable, most beloved coastal regions, bleeding residents faster than almost anywhere else in the country. 2 hurricanes explain a huge piece of this story. Helene and Milton delivered historic back-to-back blows to the region. Buildings destroyed, entire neighborhoods flooded, lives upended in ways that don't show up cleanly in a spreadsheet, but absolutely show up in a moving truck rental. Pinellas, along with neighboring Pasco, Hernando, Manatee, and Sarasota counties, now carries a relatively high disaster risk index according to FEMA's own scoring system. Residents who once shrugged off hurricane season as just part of living in paradise are increasingly deciding the risk simply isn't worth it anymore. Imagine rebuilding your home once, only to watch the next storm season roll in with forecasters already using words like historic and unprecedented again. At some point, resilience turns into exhaustion. That's exactly what's playing out here, not panic, just quiet, permanent decisions to relocate somewhere the next major storm isn't a near certainty. What makes St. Petersburg and Pinellas County such a critical example is how invisible this decline is from the outside. The beaches still look stunning in photos. The restaurants are still full on a Saturday night. But underneath that surface, the exit numbers tell a completely different story than the postcard does. Before committing to any coastal Florida move, look up that county's FEMA Risk Index yourself. It's public, it's free, and it will tell you far more about your future there than any real estate listing ever will. Because the towns quietly emptying out right now are rarely the ones making headlines during hurricane season. They're the ones nobody talks about again once the news cameras have already moved on. Number 8. Tampa. One ordinary middle-class Tampa family watched their housing costs jump by more than $1,200 a month between 2023 and 2026. Not over a decade, in 3 years. Stop and think about what that actually means for a household budget. An extra $14,000 a year, disappearing before groceries, before childcare, before a single vacation gets planned. That's not inflation. That's a fundamental shift in what it costs to simply exist in Tampa. And this family isn't an outlier. They're the new normal playing out across the entire metro area. Tampa still has everything that made it famous. No state income tax, beautiful weather most of the year, a genuinely exciting, growing city with a real skyline and real culture behind it. But for a growing number of households, none of that matters anymore, because the math has already made the decision for them whether they wanted it to or not. Picture a couple who moved to Tampa specifically to escape high costs somewhere up north, only to watch their new city quietly catch up to, and in some cases pass, the very prices they were trying to outrun. That's the quiet heartbreak driving so much of this exodus. It's not that people stopped loving Tampa. It's that loving a place and being able to afford it turned out to be two very different things. A painful lesson so many households are learning the hard way, one renewal letter at a time, long after the moving trucks have already come and gone. If you're comparing Florida metro areas right now, don't just look at this year's median rent or mortgage payment. Pull the 3-year trend line for that specific neighborhood, not just the metro average. A city can look affordable in a single snapshot and still be quietly pricing out the very people who built it, one $1,200 a month jump at a time. Exactly the way it's happening in Tampa right now. One lease renewal, one rent notice, one quiet decision to leave at a time. Number 9. Doral and Miami-Dade suburbs. Here's the twist that most people completely miss. Miami-Dade County posted the largest domestic population loss of any county in Florida in 2025. Nearly 73,000 more residents moved out to other counties and states than moved in from within the U.S. 73,000 people. That's not a rounding error. That's a small city's worth of Americans quietly walking away. For years, strong international migration papered over this outflow, masking the exodus with new arrivals from overseas. On paper, the county kept growing, and nobody asked too many questions. But by 2025, even that offset wasn't nearly enough to keep the overall numbers climbing the way they used to. Picture it like a bathtub with the drain wide open. Water keeps pouring in from one faucet, so the tub still looks full from the outside. But underneath the surface, it's draining out just as fast, sometimes faster, and eventually the level starts dropping no matter how hard that one faucet works. That's Doral. That's Miami-Dade. Longtime American residents, families who built their lives there over decades, are increasingly being replaced by international buyers and capital, not by new families putting down local roots the same way. The community underneath the growth statistic is quietly hollowing out. Even while the total population number still gets reported as a win in press releases and local news segments celebrating another record year for the county, nobody cutting the ribbon on that headline mentions the moving trucks quietly pulling away in the opposite direction, every single week, month after month. This matters far beyond Miami-Dade. It's a warning about how easily population data can be twisted into a misleading headline. Before you trust any county's growth number, break it apart. Ask whether that growth is coming from international migration, domestic migration, or simple births outnumbering deaths, because those three sources tell completely different stories. And in Doral's case, the real story is one of quiet, steady American departure, hiding just beneath a still rising number that most people never bother to look past. Number 10, Orlando and Orange County. Even Orlando's home turf isn't immune to this pattern. Orange County, the beating heart of Florida's massive tourism economy, home to the theme parks that draw tens of millions of visitors from around the entire world every single year, still lost population through domestic migration in 2025. Read that again. The county, built entirely around bringing people in for vacations, couldn't keep its own residents from packing up and leaving for good. International arrivals offset the loss on paper, the same way they did in Miami-Dade, keeping the headline number technically barely positive. But underneath that number sits the exact same story playing out across the entire state. Native Floridians and longtime transplants quietly heading elsewhere, even while news coverage keeps calling Florida an unstoppable growth machine. Think about what that really means. If Orlando, arguably the single biggest economic engine in the entire state, with theme parks, conventions, and a constant flood of tourism dollars, still can't hold on to its own residents, what does that say about the pressures facing quieter towns with none of those advantages? It suggests the forces driving this exodus aren't isolated incidents tied to one bad storm or one unlucky zip code. They're systemic, running underneath the entire state's economy, strong enough to push people out even from its most celebrated, most visited, most economically bulletproof success story. If Orlando can't fully escape this pattern, no town in Florida is truly immune to it, no matter how strong its economy looks from the outside. This is exactly why you can't judge any town or any county by its overall population trendline alone. You have to dig one layer deeper. Who's actually arriving and who's actually leaving? Because that's where the real honest story lives, hiding just beneath the surface of every impressive-sounding headline Florida keeps generating. It's a lesson every one of these 10 towns has been quietly teaching us, one departing family at a time, whether the rest of the country is paying attention or not.